Today's workshop is Genetic Connections, Introduction to Genetics, Red Flags and Resources, Part 1. I'm excited to introduce you to Ashley Michaud, who's the Genetic Navigator for the Vermont Family Network and the mom of a 6-year-old living with a rare genetic condition. Genetic Navigation is a family support that aims to provide guidance, resources, and assist families accessing genetic services or living with a genetic condition. Genetic Navigation is an initiative that began in the Mountain States Regional Genetic Network, and through the support of the New England Regional Genetic Network, Ashley completed the 8 hours of training to bring this resource to Vermont. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Genetic Connections for Families. I'm Ashley Michaud. Thanks for the lovely introduction, Karen. And I'm really happy to be here today with you to share this information about genetics. Just as a reminder, this is a part 1 of a 2-part series. Today, we're going to dive into the who and why of genetics and then take a closer look at some vocabulary relating to genetics. Just as a note, I have adapted this training from Mountain State Regional Genetics Network. They originally created it for early intervention providers. I just find this information really helpful and essential for families who are potentially living in the genetic world and going through that experience. You are going to see MSRGN, which is the Mountain States Genetic Network, mentioned quite a bit. One, because they've done a lot of work on this training, but they also developed the Genetic Navigator training that rolled out in their 8 states and now is available in many different states. So again, we have this module 1, the who and the why. Today, I'm hoping our objectives are that you're going to be able to identify what a VFN Genetic Navigator does, and then you'll also be able to recognize why genetics matter, especially during that early intervention timeframe. Here's our agenda. We're going to talk about genetic navigation, some resources around the country like NERGN and Mountain States. We are going to explore more in depth the why you might want to look at genetics, go over some statistics, and then talk about a survey that created this wonderful resource called Red Flags for Genetics. So, as I have touched upon, I'm a genetic navigator with Vermont Family Network. NERGN is our region's genetic network, and they have been providing us ongoing support at VFN to not only develop this program, but other genetic resources in our New England states and for Vermont. So a little bit more about me. As Karen mentioned, I do have a 6-year-old daughter who has a rare genetic condition, but really our entry into genetics began when she was about 5 days old. Her newborn screening came back positive for potentially carrying the cystic fibrosis gene. So a few days later, maybe at 10 days old, we had our first meeting with a genetic counselor and went through getting a sweat test done, which did come back negative. But the whole experience was really, really overwhelming. Given everything about postpartum and first-time mom and all of that, it really, it was a lot to navigate. And then we were seeing a lot of red flags with her development over the next couple of months. So at about 4 months old, she had an MRI, and that's when she was diagnosed with this rare genetic brain malformation called Joubert syndrome. And then we had more genetic testing to confirm and figure out which gene she actually carried and how my husband and I contributed to that. And so that diagnosis really, I think, changed everything for us, as one can imagine. In the last 6 years, we've lived pretty heavily in the medical world. We've had a lot of other genetic testing done. We've had whole genome sequencing, actually, have a large medical team, 2 genetic specialists on our team. We live with a metabolic, not live with, we have a metabolic specialist on our team as well. So we, to say that I've had experience navigating this world is kind of an understatement. We've lived it for 6 years. This opportunity for genetic navigation came up about a year ago, and I really jumped on it. I've really felt passionately about being able to provide some kind of guiding light to families going through the similar process. It's not easy, it's complicated, it's emotionally charged, and I felt really strongly that about being able to give back to families. So this was such a wonderful fit to join VFN and be able to help families navigate through this. Here is a bit more about NERGN, the New England Regional Genetics Network. Their kind of mission is to advance the health and well-being of individuals who are at risk or live with genetic conditions by improving access to genetic services, educating professionals to strengthen systems of genetic care, and supporting families in New England. There is their website. They have a lot of wonderful resources on there, nergin.org, and they serve Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont. And they are federally funded by the Health Resources Services Administration, also known as HRSA. It's important to note that they are part of a larger national network. There are 7 total genetic networks across the country, and they are coordinated by the National Coordinating Center, which is that dark blue dot. It's hard to see, but there's, I think, some DNA strand going through it. And then the National Genetic Education and Family Support Center, or Family Center as it's referred to, also contributes by housing another part of the grants, and they are out of the Genetic Alliance. So, who am I? How to become a genetic navigator? So the most important criteria is that it needs to be an individual or family member who has navigated genetics. As I've said, it was developed in the Mountain States with funding from HRSA, and Christy Weiss, who is a project manager out there, actually is the one who developed this and is the chair, the first person to be a genetic navigator. And then you have to, there's 5 to 8 hours of training to do initially, and then there's ongoing support and monthly touch points throughout. So as a genetic navigator, my role is to meet families at any point along their genetic journey, whether they're just having concerns, they're noticing red flags, they're in the process of getting a diagnosis, or they've just gotten a diagnosis, and I'm there to offer support and kind of help navigate that odyssey that they might be on. I like to kind of, if families come with concerns, we can discuss next steps and how to have that conversation with their PCP, how we can take those red flags and organize them and look at development through some different lenses. Also being able to provide resources to families who might be encountering barriers to finding a genetics specialist in the area, or who are running into insurance roadblocks as well. Another really important part that I think is so essential is being able to connect families with resources and support organizations. It can, especially living with a rare disease, it can be hard to find that support in your own state, and to be able to connect with others who are going through a similar experience can be really powerful. And also just kind of meet with families who want to get involved in advocating for genetics, however that may look. I think probably the best benefit out of working with VFN is that I can also connect families with those other resources like our respite funding, our parent-to-parent matching, the family faculty, and the wonderful supports of our education and mental health support teams that they offer. It's kind of feels really nice to be able to wrap people around in lots of different supports, whatever they might need. Okay, so find your chat box, please. And then first thing that comes to mind, what why do you think a family may benefit from exploring genetics? I'll give you a minute to pop some things in there. We can talk about it. Awesome. So thanks, Jessica, I believe said adoption, which is absolutely might be something, a great way to find out some more information. To help family find those answers, it can help to explore other treatments and therapies that help address some concerning symptoms. I think of it as connecting the dots for things that don't seem necessarily related. A genetic condition might be able to do that for you. If you're seeing, patterns between siblings or in the family, genetics might be something you want to look at to help explain some of that. Those concerning symptoms from birth, as was in our family's case, really led us into looking at genetics. Another big area, I think in that those early years too, is the regressions of skills with no clear cause. You might have your PCP, or if you're in early intervention, they might have some concerns that we want to explore through genetics. As I've said earlier, to help find support. Genetics might rule in or it might rule out certain conditions. And just to kind of explore that family history of parents or close relatives who have genetic conditions, and to see if that has been inherited along the way. Karen, did I miss anything else in the chat?
Nope, I think you covered it.
Okay, thank you. So on the flip side of that, why not? Why might a family not want to explore genetics? Why might they not be a benefit there? Again, if you just want to, if you have an idea, you can pop it right there in the chat for us. So here are some reasons that families might choose not to. Some genetic conditions have no treatment, so that information might not change anything. There's this idea that genetic testing is very, very costly too, and families might not have financial resources or some insurance barriers there. When I think of why not genetics, I think the first thing that came to my mind was it's complicated. It's this big idea, and it's hard to kind of comprehend and understand all of it. Maybe genetic testing is not culturally appropriate for your family. Maybe there's a differing of beliefs there. We know that genetic clinics can sometimes be far away and hard to access. That could be another barrier. Families might just not be interested in it at this time, especially if there's a feeling that there's nothing you can do if there is a positive test. Along with clinics being really far away, testing can take a long time. It can take many months to get some testing back. And depending on your family or the child, it can feel really invasive. Some testing is just a cheek swab, some of it is a blood draw. And maybe you're having some issues with insurance, not being able to cover it. Definitely scared of those outcomes for sure. And no test, there can be mistakes there for sure. So along with thinking about that, why not? I think we're able to bust some of those myths about genetic testing because it's a very evolving field of study. So the first myth is that all genetic conditions are caught at birth through newborn screening, and that's false. I believe Vermont screens for 30 or 32 genetic conditions, something like cystic fibrosis, but as in our family's case, it wouldn't screen for something like her Joubert syndrome, so that wouldn't be caught with newborn screening. The other myth is that every childhood condition is caused by genetics. We are fascinating humans, and not everything has a genetic foundation to it. All genetic conditions are untreatable or uncurable. That's also false. There's lots of advancements that are happening. Genetic diagnosis cannot help a child thrive. Again, that's a false, it's a myth out there. Having that knowledge can help target treatment and therapies. I know for our family, Joubert has a high occurrence of having liver disease or kidney failure. So knowing that, we have routine yearly monitoring that goes on so we can kind of stay ahead of those things if possible. If we didn't have that diagnosis, we might not know to be looking for those things or catch things in a timely manner. All genetic changes are harmful and cause disease. Again, that's false, and we're going to dive into that a little bit later, but there can be genetic changes that are just a change that does not impact our health at all. There are lots of discoveries going on too about genetic changes that actually protect us from different things. And then finally, genetic testing is very expensive. It used to be 5-10 years ago, it was this kind of new frontier of things of sorts, and it was very expensive. The prices have come down exponentially. Here in Vermont, we're really lucky that our genetics teams, the counselors and the specialists, are really good at getting testing covered through insurance. And they have a lot of supports there for families who need support around that. Also, there's been a lot of legislature, I think in the last year or two, around thinking about if young children having health conditions that kind of encouraging insurance companies to be able to provide genetic testing to support that, to find some answers. So it's an evolving field. The price is coming down quite a lot. Just a little plug that if you or your family or you know of someone who's struggling with that aspect of it, to please reach out to me as the Genetic Navigator through Vermont Family Network, and we can certainly work through some of that. Okay, back to the why. So why would some families find genetics helpful, seeing a genetic specialist? So there's this rule of 3. So if there's 3 or more systems that are showing symptoms, like if you having respiratory symptoms and low tone and maybe some vision challenges, that would be a sign that to see a genetic specialist and consider testing. So it can connect things that seem unrelated. That genetic information can certainly help with family planning, but also preparing for care in the long term and the bigger picture of things. Like I had said, with our case of knowing about this yearly monitoring that we need to do, helps us prepare for the care that she currently needs and might need in the future. Back to that support piece, having a diagnosis and a name for something can allow you to find that support, especially with those rare conditions. There's certainly almost definitely a support group out there. It's just being able to find them. And again, a genetic test can rule out a number of diagnoses, so it helps doctors and families cross things off of that list. We're going to switch to thinking about a couple of statistics here. There are 7,000 identified rare diseases, and to be considered rare, it's the condition needs to affect less than 2,000 people in the United States. That's the kind of the definition that they're working from. About 80% of those rare diseases are thought to have a genetic cause. It's quite a big number. And then I think why it's so important for us to be thinking about this information and knowing about this and thinking about the red flags is that 50 to 75% of rare diseases impact children. So thinking about that early on can really improve different outcomes. Just a little plug that rare disease is coming up. It's celebrated on the last day of February every year. So usually February 28th, but extra rare this year on February 29th. And it's a day just to advocate and raise awareness for those living with rare diseases. I believe Rare New England has a lot of resources on their page about this day that's coming up. It's if you kind of are connected to any of those resources, people are talking about it quite a bit. And just reiterating again, thinking about genetics early can have so much impact and affect outcomes. Those first 3 years are just full of a variety of milestones. And, I remember going into our PCP and always filling out the ASQ every single time. And it's kind of like the front of everybody's mind. So it's being aware of it can just lead you to having those conversations earlier. So that leads me to this survey that Mountain States put out. They did it in 2021, and they asked families to think about those indicators, the warning signs or symptoms that they were seeing before their genetic diagnosis. And I think it's pretty astounding what they came out with. One thing that they learned is that it took 6 years to receive a genetic diagnosis on average after noticing the first red flag indicator. And this is, the Mountain States are kind of like from Texas up through like Montana and Wyoming. So that region of the country. And 61% of the time, a geneticist made the diagnosis, then a subspecialist might have, and even some primary care specialists were the ones who were providing that diagnosis. 89% of those reported red flags were noted before 4 years of age. And they had 114 families complete the survey. And out of that, there were noted almost 500, I believe 479 red flags. So it was really, it's very comprehensive. And I feel like when you see it in a slide or two, you're going to kind of just see the organization and how helpful that it could be. So this is the resource, and I find that this really helps to have those conversations with professionals, whether it be early intervention therapists. If you're an early intervention therapist, it might be helpful to have that conversation with families, and then also with your medical community, whether it's your pediatrician or specialists. So how they broke it up is they split it into these different domains: the developmental delay, physical features, feeding issues, behavior, failure to thrive, strength and tone, and then in the white at the bottom, it's those other red flags, things that didn't quite fit into another category. And again, it kind of brings us back to that rule of 3. So if you're seeing red flags in 3 or more of these domains, then that really probably warrants getting in to see a genetic specialist. Oh my gosh, sorry guys, didn't mean to do that. We're going to finish up with this who and why part, and then we're going to switch to this module 2 part of it, which is the vocabulary of genetics. We're going to get a little sciencey. We're also going to use this analogy, which I think around baking, which I think is great and kind of simplifies this really complicated subject. So again, we have some learning objectives for this part of it, which is to help you guys understand basic genetic terminology. And then at the end, you should be able to utilize the simple analogy that we're going to be giving you to illustrate the genetic concept to other family members, friends, other providers. So we're going to think about genetics and go over some different vocab. We're going to bake a genetics cake. I wish we were in person live because then we could have cake at the end of this. And then we're going to connect this idea of genetic changes and how they connect to red flags. So if you guys could find your chat box again and write a word. When you think genetics, what do you think? DNA, definitely. What came to my mind first when I was first doing this training was complicated. And then I was remembering the, I think Mendel's peas from ninth grade biology. That was when I think genetics, that's what I was coming up with. But some other words that you might hear are inherited, somatic, duplication, genomics, deletion, variant, chromosome, DNA, the double helix, engineering, de novo, hereditary. It's a lot of science words that can come in when we're thinking about genetics. And I think it's really important for us to, as consumers of genetics, to really be able to understand and have some health literacy around what our specialists are telling us. So we're going to keep it really simple. We're going to talk about DNA, chromosome, gene, the genome, a protein and enzyme, and then genetic change. So we're just going to hopefully keep it really basic, really understandable, and give a really strong foundation for understanding a little bit of genetics. So we're going to bake a cake, a genetics cake. It's hopefully going to help break down in this kind of big, complicated, intimidating topic. We're going to kind of look big picture and then break it down piece by piece and then kind of come back together and put it all back into that big picture. So lots of opportunities for learning and understanding. So we're just going to dive right into this. But first, we're going to think about the DNA as our alphabet, and that those letters A, T, C, and G, those are going to be used to write our recipe. And the recipe in our analogy is equivalent to a gene. And then when you get lots of recipes together, they kind of get collected into a recipe book, right? And so that recipe book is like a chromosome. And then, so that book is full and you've got a huge stack, a huge set of recipe books. Maybe, I don't know a popular cookbook maker anymore, but maybe like Martha Stewart. You've got every one of her cookbooks, and that's a set of cookbooks, and that is similar. It's equivalent to our whole genome. And then what's the really important part of this that I want you guys to pick up on is that gene, that recipe is what makes a protein or enzyme. That's what makes the cake. So first we're going to talk about DNA, and we're going to break this down piece by piece. And DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. I'm glad I got that out. I've been practicing because it's a mouthful. I think it's pretty easy to understand why we just say DNA instead. And you don't necessarily need to know that big long word, but now you have that science term kind of in your back pocket. So the DNA is simply, it's our alphabet that's used to write the instructions that tell our body how to grow and function. And this alphabet just has 4 letters, A, T, C, and G. And next up is the genes. So these are the sections of DNA that contain the instructions or as we're thinking about it today, the recipe to make the proteins and enzymes and the other products in the cells of our body. And as you may know, that one copy of each gene is inherited from each parent. So again, the DNA are the letters used to write the recipe, which is our gene. Now we have a chromosome, and that is when we have DNA, the genes, and then the chromosome is our recipe book. So it's the DNA packaged into chromosomes, and every chromosome has many genes. So like a book has many different recipes. Each cell has 46 chromosomes. That's 23 pairs. They're numbered 1 through 22, and the 23rd pair is commonly known as the sex chromosome, our X and our Y. So we have our DNA, which is our letters to write our recipe, which is our gene. And then when we get lots of recipes together, that's our chromosome. And now I want to talk about that recipe and that protein that it makes. So proteins are really made up of various amino acids, and the type and order of those amino acids is determined by the DNA sequence of our genes. There are thousands of proteins in our body that we make every single day, and they do very important work. I think there's estimated to be about 20,000 genes in the human body. And so that's, if you think back to, that's 20,000 recipes that code for those proteins. And so we're thinking about our proteins as the cake. We use that recipe to make a protein or to make a cake. So to take our analogy one step further, we're going to talk about enzymes as well. So enzymes are really just a type of protein that helps speed up chemical reactions in our body. They come in all different shapes and sizes. I'm a visual learner, so the visual on the slide of that slice of cake, a cupcake, that multi-layered chocolatey moussey type cake, that just is to represent that enzymes can look many different ways and come in many different shapes and sizes. So in all enzymes they're varied. They help break down things we eat, the food that we eat. And they also do a lot of various things. A good example might be blood clotting. So if you have thinking about having too much of a certain enzyme, you might get something like a blood clot. You might be more susceptible to that, and that could create some health challenges. If you have too little of that blood clotting enzyme, then you might have really thin blood and bleed very easily. Again, could lead to some health challenges. So another kind of little trivia fact is that an enzyme is not destroyed during that chemical reaction. It gets to be used over and over again. And then a cell can contain thousands of different types of enzyme molecules, and each is specific to a particular chemical reaction. So it just always reminds me that we're really, really complicated, complex beings. And then finally, just going back to that genome, and that is the entire set of genetic instructions that are found in a cell. So lots of different DNA going to the recipes, lots of different collections of recipes being made together. As promised, we're kind of back to that big picture of things, just to reinforce again that idea that our DNA is the alphabet. It's the letters used to write our recipe. Again, they're A, T, C, and G. And that recipe is equivalent to our gene. And when we get a bunch of recipes together in a book, that's like our chromosome. And then when we get a whole set or collection of books, that's our genome. And the most important part of this is that recipe creates that protein or enzyme, and our body is reliant on those proteins and enzymes for just about everything. Here is just a quick, different way to look at it. If that baking analogy just wasn't connecting with you, you might want to check out genome.gov. They have a lot of really great resources and information there. And this visual guide, if you look down at the cell at the bottom of the screen, and that's kind of going big, that's our cell. And then if we start to unravel it, you're going to see your chromosome. And we keep unraveling and going and going. And finally, you get to that gene. You keep going, and finally you see the DNA and then the letters in those base pairs. So it's just kind of a different way to look at it. Okay, so we have that analogy under our belts. We're having some basic understanding of our DNA, gene, and protein. So I think we're probably the part we're all here for is how do genetic mutations and variants lead to these health challenges and disabilities? And before we kind of dive into that, I just want to make a good note that genes themselves do not cause those health challenges. These conditions are caused by changes, the variants that happen in a DNA that can alter or eliminate a gene's function. Kind of an example of this is you might hear someone say the cystic fibrosis gene. And what they probably mean by that is that it's a version of the CFTR gene that contains a variant that causes the health condition. Everyone, all of us, including those who do not have cystic fibrosis, do have a version of that CFTR gene. So going back to our analogy, but this time thinking about baking and the genetic change. So if we look at this middle column where that chocolate cake is, you'll see across the top we have flour, sugar, oats, an egg, some milk, and then in the circle there's a bag of cocoa, and under that is the word chocolate. And you'll notice that the C and the H are in blue, and those middle letters, OCOLAT, are in this orangish color, and then the E again is back in that blue. And when you make this recipe, you're going to get a chocolate cake. So this recipe or this gene codes for this one type of protein. If you look next to it at the cheesecake column, you'll notice that almost all of the ingredients are the same, except for when you get to that cheese. And again, the word cheese, we have the C and the H in the blue, but those middle letters, EES, are in that orange color. And then E again is in the blue. And this recipe, just that one change, makes something entirely different. It makes a cheesecake. So let's kind of think about that's how our proteins are all different. Between those four letters, the order that they go in code for different things. Just like changing out chocolate and cheese, which have some of the same letters, make a chocolate cake versus a cheesecake. So let's talk a little bit more about some of those words you might be hearing from medical professionals. And all of these words are really just talking about genetic changes. I do think it's really important for us to recognize that some of these words can be sort of like emotionally charged. You're talking about yourself or a loved one. Genetics is highly personal and complicated. And so when you're hearing a term like mutation, it might not sit very well. But these are the terms our medical professionals are going to be using. So I think it's important to know what they're actually meaning when they're saying that. Also, just kind of wanted to reiterate that some changes are good. I think of some as being neutral. They really make no difference. And then some can result in health challenges. So these changes are often referred to as mutations. If you've ever gotten genetic testing back, you'll also see pathogenic variants. And they also will maybe use words like chromosomal difference. And so backing up to the pathogenic variants, it's just that there's a change in the gene that causes one protein to not form or function properly. When lots of DNA changes on a large scale and it impacts sections of the chromosome, those are referred to as those chromosomal differences. And some types of differences or rearrangements can include deletions, insertions, and duplications. And those kind of mean exactly what they are. Deletion is part of it's missing. Insertion is that some of it's been put in, and then duplications is that there could be some repeating. And so kind of wrapping it up here, thinking about those genetic changes and then thinking back to our red flags. So when a genetic change is happening inside the body and that protein or enzyme is not produced in the right amount, it might be higher, it could take a different shape or a different format. And then sometimes that differences that's happening on the inside is going to impact that function, and we might be able to start to observe those changes in the form of red flag. We talked about those red flags earlier, and I think a good way that I think about this is with my own daughter, and that her genetic, her variant and change, it caused her alleles to be shorter, and that changed the way her brain was formed. In the area of her brain that's impacted controls motor and vision and speech, temperature control, lots of different regions. So we started, because that change, we started to see her not meeting her motor milestones, having some vision differences very early on, being stronger on one side than the other. And then later on, the lack of speech that came along with that. So that genetic change, we then be able to see in those red flags. So just a little preview for next time. I'm hoping all of you can join me in a couple of weeks, and we're going to take kind of a closer look at these red flags and kind of utilize some case studies. So seeing some real life examples in them and comparing them to the red flags. And then I think a really essential part too is, so we have red flags, what do we do next? So thinking about how we can advocate and what to do when we have genetic concerns. Just, a little thought to leave you with based on DNA. What does DNA have to do with it? Don't navigate alone, do navigate alongside. That is the Mountain States website is listed there. They have a ton of resources and information, webinars and PDFs that are really phenomenally done. If this presentation has made you think and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do now, please reach out to me at VFN and I can help support you through that. And kind of just thank you all for being here. I'm going to try something a little bit new, and in the next minute or so, hopefully you can complete the survey that's going to be in the chat. And then after that, in about a minute, we're going to come back for some time to answer any questions or comments you might have.
So thanks, Ashley. And I would reiterate, it would be great if you would use this minute to fill out the evaluation that Rachel just put in the chat. We really do need the results of evaluations for our grant reporting.
I'm going to stop sharing now and see if anyone has any questions or comments.
It's amazing how long 1 minute is when you're actually sitting. We still have 17 seconds to
Oh
go.
my gosh.
Okay, well, thank you. I hope that you all filled out your evaluations. So I see there are a couple of questions. There were a couple that came in before the workshop started, so I'll just read those out. So from a parent, how rare is mosaic partial trisomy 18?
I maybe should have clarified this. So I'm not a genetics counselor by any means. So that is I did look that up, and apparently, according to the NIH, it is the second most common autosomal trisomy syndrome, and it's about 1 in 6,000 to 1 in 8,000 diagnosed in the US. So there's that answer. But any, I think, in-depth science, disease, condition-specific questions are really helpful to have a genetic counselor available for. But if you need help getting in touch with a genetic counselor, I'm your girl.
And then there was just a comment, I just want to listen to how other parents are dealing with challenges as I am. So maybe, Ashley, I would think that there are a lot of support groups out there for probably every syndrome that there is.
Yeah, there's definitely those support groups. And I think the what I was hoping to maybe highlight through this too is that genetics is complicated, and some of that dismay and that frustration can come from not having great access to genetic specialists, or not getting answers, being on this odyssey of not getting the answers that you're needing through testing, or having access to testing as well. And then, post-diagnosis, if you get there too, it can be really challenging for that support, and how it can turn your life upside down a little bit, and having how things might look different. And so I think it's kind of both like that pre and the complicated world of genetics, and that post of needing to find your village, as I like to say.
I see someone put in the chat, it does not look like it's a question. Feeding, red flag. CSHN is testing a feeding matters screening tool. So far, it's been rolled out in 3 counties. I guess there's information on feedingmatters.org. Or if there are any questions about Vermont feeding disorders screening, reach out to Marinelle Newton at vermont.gov.
Awesome. I'm definitely going to check that out for my own knowledge. Wonderful.
Someone says, I love the red flags handout. I will certainly print it and share it with families.
Great. I can also get you a PDF version of that if if you email me at ashley.michaud@vtfn.org. I can get you a PDF of that. And just kind of as a note, we are working on getting those translated. It's available in Spanish, but we're hoping to get permission to translate it into a few other languages that might be important to our communities.
Oh, great. There's a comment here that I hope pediatric practices share your presentation with families.
It's going to be on our YouTube page, so anyone can see it there. I'm just going to pop my email into the chat.
Right. So essence, with all VFN employees, it would be the first name, last name, and then at vtfn.org. There we go.
And so that's if you kind of need some additional resources around this. If you're thinking you or someone you know might need genetic navigation, either calling our helpline or using the info at vtfn.org is a kind of preferred method of contact there.
And Ashley, I think this is sort of a plug as well. It is not just young children who should be looked at for any genetic diagnosis,
Correct. Yeah.
because we know that new genetic disorders are being found probably every day. So it could be that if a parent was unable to get a diagnosis for their young child and their child is grown up, it is still worth it to seek that diagnosis.
Certainly. Yeah. That's a really good point to make, Karen. I think if you've kind of felt like you've closed that chapter on genetics, but didn't get any answers and still have concerns, it's definitely worthwhile to advocate for those needs because the field is evolving so rapidly and there's so much more testing available now and new discoveries every day.
And really, the more people who have a genetic disorder that is identified, the more we can add to that database of information
That's
that
right.
can lead to future treatment.
That's absolutely right. I love when some of the Facebooks I see that there'll be someone who posts and they'll feel like they're maybe the one or two only one in the world. And then all of a sudden, like they'll find that other person. And I think that helps create that village and community of support that everyone needs.
So are there any other questions? I have one more, Ashley, if
Okay.
nobody else has any. So does it seem like from what you hear that general practitioners do encourage individuals or families to seek a genetic diagnosis or to seek out a geneticist to see if that answer lies there?
It's a good question. I don't know if I have a great answer from our own personal experience. Our lived experience is our family doctor was phenomenal at seeing those red flags of and referring us on very early to the specialists that we needed to see. I think similar to maybe some other diagnoses around milestones, some doctors might want to take a wait and see approach and like see if you're there with concerns at your 1 year well check and they may want to wait till the next well check or 6 months to see how things have developed. And that can be really scary to wait in those times because you kind of really do need that referral to get in to see a genetic specialist. And we know the wait to see a genetic specialist can be very long. I think we're looking at 6 or more months, maybe up to a year in Vermont. So it's a really long time to wait. If that was to happen, we can advocate totally to see a genetic counselor sooner than that. There's more flexibility and availability there, and they might be able to get some testing if appropriate going. As a genetic navigator, I can also help you during that wait and see time. If you're going to wait 6 months to see your pediatrician, we can work together to kind of outline your concerns and use something like the red flags tool to say, we're seeing this across so many areas of development. I really think we need to see genetics. So sometimes I think having something more concrete to show them. Another thing is, I believe it's the Help Me Grow will help also in these situations with their ASQ to kind of just get some data. We know that people in the science world and medical community like data. So if we can help gather that for them, that can help us to get to a genetic specialist a little bit sooner.
Okay, thank you, Ashley. So for those still on the call, remember to register for part 2, and that will be presented on March 14th at 10 a.m. So we have many more interesting workshops coming up, and you can find details about those on the homepage of our website, along with the links to previously recorded ones. And this workshop will be up pretty soon too. We have tons of information on our website. Getting connected with us is easy. You can follow us on Facebook or Instagram or join our closed Facebook page if you are a parent. You can also sign up for our monthly e-news or check out our YouTube channel. So we are here to help. Contact us by phone or email. So thank you again, everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Hopefully to see you in a couple weeks.